Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome a very familiar contributor back to this program, Matt Cookson. You've been on here a number of times before. For those meeting you for the first time, tell us just a little bit about who you are.
Well, I'm an alumni of the Young Voices program. I wrote a bunch of articles through them. I continue to publish things on my own. And then as my 9 to 5, I work in the defense industry in a supply chain role.
So I got to tell you, Matt, since the last time we talked, there's been times I've been very optimistic that, wow, there really has been kind of a change in management in Washington, D.C. when DOGE first came out, and look at all the questionable spending. I'm trying to be generous here, but when a lot of the stuff came out and it was like, fine, we have an excuse to cut this spending. NPR and PBS, they also found themselves facing the possibility of maybe they would see their budgets cut. And I'm looking at an article you wrote here for Real Clear Politics. In light of congressional testimony, you're saying Congress should defund NPR and PBS. And I think this may actually even predate the DOGE efforts, but talk to me a little bit about what was it that got these two organizations brought before Congress in the first place?
So both of these organizations have been around for decades. The funding that created them arose back in the 1960s. We all know someone, or maybe ourselves remember a time when there were only two TV stations on TV, and one of them wasn't working. So part of the thinking in funding NPR and PBS was to, create options for a dependable source of news. And the reason that's become controversial is PBS and NPR are supposed to be an objective source of news. But, if we look at the content they put out in recent years, especially during election time, we can see that they're anything but objective.
Well, and I'm thinking specifically about NPR CEO Catherine Mayer. Some of the testimony that she gave and some of the things that she said about, truth can be kind of an impediment to what we need to accomplish. And basically she was making the case for sometimes it's better to not tell people the truth, and we get to decide, whether or not that happens. Just, jaw-dropping admission of, wait, you're cooking the facts? That's not right.
Yeah, that's a pretty stunning admission from someone who's supposed to be heading an organization that is supposed to be a nonpartisan outlet. And when you hear comments like that and hear stories about the types of news stories that were getting suppressed, especially during election time, it really raises the level of concern about how the funds that the federal government is giving these organizations are being spent.
So let's put some skin on this in terms of how much money, for instance, does either NPR or PBS receive in terms of federal tax dollars? I'm curious how big of a chunk of the pie they're getting.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of debate about that. I think both on the right and the left can have a misconception about what that level of funding is. And I think sort of a bigger picture view of things is more about the principle that's at stake. A lot of people on the right may think, NPR and PBS get all of their funding from the federal government. That's not exactly true, especially back in the 1980s under the Reagan administration. He broached this subject of directing federal funds away from NPR, and as a result, they sought a lot of more private funding for their efforts. And that continues to this day, that NPR's number one funder is corporate sponsors to the tune of something like $120 million. Now, the federal government is still number two at $90 million. So, the kinds of people who want to see a balanced budget, like the two of us and a lot of your listeners, may be discouraged to hear that the budget is not going to get balanced through cutting funding to places like PBS and NPR. It's more that there's a principle at stake that the government does not need to be amplifying partisan voices of one stripe or another. We are a country that acknowledges the right to free press. And, when you have federal funds going to any organization, that muddies the waters about what the state considers to be objective news.
I was blown away by a figure that you published in your article about the breakdown of, I know they're supposed to be unbiased, but look, can they help it if, their ratio of Democrats to Republicans in the NPR newsroom is like 87 to nothing. And it's like, I'm not saying everybody is somehow being subjective, but that's a pretty tough odd to beat, that, everybody is from this particular ideological camp. I think it's asking a lot to think that they would represent fairly,
For sure. Yeah. I think, as I think it was Uri Berliner, who was a former editor at NPR, who brought up that point, that something like 87, 90 of the people in the newsroom at NPR, and all of them are Democrats. You can't expect to get anything close to objective coverage. If you're trying to get a critic to come review your pizza restaurant, and all 10 of the food critics at a particular magazine all hate pizza, you're not going to get an objective evaluation of your restaurant. And so I think the same principle holds here, that if you have 80, 90 people who are all registered towards one particular party, even if they're not trying to be biased, I think it's fair to expect that you won't see complete objectivity, even in the best case scenario.
And you raise a question here too, Matt, which I think really this is one of the big ones that needs to be answered first and foremost. Where is the authority for the federal government to engage in public broadcasting? In terms of, I don't remember seeing that in the Constitution or anything that could reasonably be construed as that. And yet here's the federal government pumping out hundreds of millions of dollars, in that direction. How does that happen?
Yeah, it's pretty astonishing among a lot of the things that the federal government does, that we find pretty astonishing when we look at the very basics of the Constitution. The First Amendment, one of those freedoms, is the right to a free press. And, if the government has their hand in the cookie jar of any media company, you can't say with any degree of credibility that that is a free press. Overall, the United States does have a free press, but when we do have the government funneling money towards one outlet, that completely goes against the structure of our Constitution that the founders put in place.
No, it makes sense. And, I appreciate, in fairness, you point out, there are some pretty cool things that have come through PBS, for instance, Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers, Liberty's Kids. I grew up watching Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, and it was great, but there are also plenty of, private sector programs that teach and likewise inspire. So it's not like, though this content wouldn't exist if not for the taxpayers and these, federally funded programs.
That's exactly right. It's not like one of those things that we can all agree on should be reserved to the state, because otherwise there would be chaos. It's not akin to, military force or police power that is something that should inherently be reserved to the state. There's no reason why children's content needs to be produced by the state. And as, we can go on the internet and do a simple search, there are countless examples of privately produced children's content that the government doesn't need to fund in order for it to exist.
So as a result of the NPR and PBS CEOs testifying before Congress back, in April, what's happened since? Is anything meaningful happening or going to happen as a result of their testimony?
So for all of its hype, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, was not an official government agency. They merely proposed recommendations, and they proposed about, I think it's in the neighborhood of 160 billion worth of funding cuts. Now it's up to Congress to take those recommendations and put them into law. And Congress is actually reviewing a rescission bill this week that will address a lot of those funding concerns. PBS and NPR are among the cuts that they are considering. So it remains to be seen how Congress will vote on that issue. It's tightly contested, very narrow margins. So we'll see how Congress votes on that issue.
Again, we are talking with Matt Cookson. Matt is a contributor for Young Voices, as well as wearing many other hats. Where can people find you, Matt?
They can follow me, Matt Cookson 995 on X. I also do a Substack every weekday called The Way the Cookie Crumbles. So if you'd like a short analysis of a news story of the day, 400 words or less, in a way that's informative and entertaining, go ahead and give me a follow.
Recording stopped.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We are happy to be joined by Agustin Forzani. And I'm sorry, I stumbled on your name here, but Agustin, it is so good to have you on the program. For people meeting you for the first time, tell us a little bit about who you are as well as what you do.
Hi, well, thank you for having me, Brian. Well, I am a Young Voices contributor. I am in the writer's track right now, and I am also a professor of economics from the Catholic University in Argentina. Right now, I am based in Argentina. I am working for my family business here also, and as a side job, I also teach in the university.
Well, I'm looking at an article that you wrote that was published in Real Clear Markets about the case against Trump's tariffs. And I know there was a lot of talk about a month ago or more as Trump, launched those tariffs, and deadlines have come and gone. And I know the reason for the tariffs is ostensibly this is going to send jobs back to America where factories will be built in America. But you make a very strong case that, hey, if you want to be richer, you work more instead of just raising the prices. Talk to me about what Trump's trying to accomplish versus what is being accomplished, and then let's talk about alternatives to tariffs.
Yeah, so basically what I try to do, well, first of all, tariff policy right now is quite complicated. They change all the time. It's quite difficult to follow the deadlines and all of that. I wrote this article in May, and some things already changed. But the main case is almost the same. But what I tried to do is to bring some old writings from the past, from Frederick Bastiat, who was in the 1800s actually, wrote several volumes of different articles criticizing the tariff policy of the French government at that time. And if you have the time to read, it's quite easy to read because he wrote like old satires. It's quite fun and easy to read. And if you read those kind of arguments at that time are the same as today, and you can make the connection. So one of the main arguments of Frederick Bastiat in his book is that, well, okay, if you try to bring jobs back to the U.S., this is one of the main arguments behind the tariffs. Mm-hmm. Well, he says, I have another idea to do that without messing with the tariffs. You can also tie one of the hands of the workers, and you will have much more work to do, right? So he tries to do a connection right there, and if you do like him and you bring the argument to the final conclusion, you realize that tariffs at the end actually don't work, right? So in the article I go a bit more in depth, and I explain. First of all, the U.S. right now doesn't have a shortage of employment. The unemployment rate is 4.2%, and the average is like 5%. Economists normally consider 5% to be almost full employment. So the U.S. is almost in full employment. So you don't have people, you don't have an unemployment problem. Second, my second argument is if you try to do that, if you try to restrict the importation of products so that you can produce, if you restrict to manufacture in the U.S., you will have to switch people around, to switch from one shop to the other, and that will reduce the productivity of the U.S. because you will make people to switch from already productive jobs to jobs that maybe are much more unproductive. And that's in the end, and in the long run, that will decrease, reduce the productivity of the U.S. and reduce reduce GDP. It's nonsense. It's not a good policy to apply to in the long run. So those are my main arguments. Then I explain, you have some tariffs applied specifically to certain companies like Apple, or I also explained that several companies, small companies specifically, are doing really bad right now with the tariffs. But the main argument is like that you won't have more employment just with the tariffs. You will just switch people from one job to the other, and that will be much more unproductive.
Agustin, I have to tell you, I'm very impressed that you use Frederick Bastiat to back up the arguments that you're making for why this kind of artificial interference in the market always comes with costs that aren't, counted as part of the intended result. And he warned of this, and his advice appears to be pretty timeless in that it seems to make exactly as much sense today as it did, in the mid 1800s when he was saying this. Talk to me about what is happening in terms of the effect of the tariffs that have gone into effect. Are we feeling the pain of those effects at this time? Are there businesses that are starting to tighten their belts?
First of all, I highly recommend. I have my Bible here, my Bastiat Bible. If you wanna learn about tariff policy, you have to at least read some of these articles. He has like hundreds of articles in this book. It's called Economic Sophisms, and what is seen and what is not seen. Wonderful book, but the articles are quite short and really good, and really, as you said, timeless. As you asked, several companies are trying to do their best. Some companies are dipping in their savings, some are, have to cover negative margins, reducing staff. And like big companies, for example, Walmart, as I said in the article, they are cutting jobs. They have to relocate resources and do their best to cope with these tariffs. This is just causing pain right now, and it will cause more pain if Trump maintains the tariffs in the long run.
So let's we got about a minute and a half left here. Let's talk about what would be the better approach. I mean, if we were to step to something other than tariffs, what could the government do? And that, I guess I'm asking in the sense of even if getting out of the way is one of those options.
Yeah, no. If you have to, as I said, you have to trace the argument to the end of the conclusion, and you will realize that the best policy always is free trade. Free trade. Open the borders, and you will have more productivity, more growth, more wealth in the long run. And that's what the U.S. did in the last 100 years. The U.S. went in the other direction. The U.S. reduced tariffs as other countries in the world. And if you see the numbers, GDP and all of that, if you trace the reduction in tariffs and the increase in GDP globally, you will realize that that's the way to go, not the other way around. So that's my advice, as I would say in like 1 minute.
Okay. I thank you so much. Again, we are talking with Agustin Forzani. He is a Young Voices contributor, as well as does a number of other exciting things. For those who want to follow you and your work, where can they find you on social media? Where can they find your work being published?
So I am on X or LinkedIn, in both places. Agustin Forzani is Agustin, Forzani with C, like an Italian last name. So you can find me there, and I publish my articles there.
Hey, wonderful to visit with you. I look forward to the next time we get to chat.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And we are back on Moving Forward with Young Voices. And we're happy to welcome Thomas Blakely back to the program. You have been on here before, Thomas, right? I know we talked.
I have. We have certainly talked. I missed your microphone, just the excellent audio quality. I would never forget having been on your podcast.
Well, that's very kind. Listen, for those who are meeting you for the first time, though, take a moment here and tell us just a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I'm a lawyer. I'm a federal judicial law clerk. Prior to that, I served in the Department of Justice. And I also worked at an international law firm. In addition to some other stops along the way, I'm a contributor at Young Voices, and I write about a wide range of legal and public policy topics. I'm also originally from Boston, which I feel like is particularly relevant for the story we're talking about today, and I'm happy to be here. Yeah,
I'm a little bit ashamed to admit, obviously I'm not consuming enough TV. I didn't know about Karen Read and her case in Massachusetts. So I'm going to assume there may be some people like me who are just, hearing of it for the first time. But tell me a little bit about what is the Karen Read fiasco?
Sure. So fiasco it certainly is, or became. So the Karen Read case is it's a murder case that started in Norfolk County, Massachusetts, which is a suburb, or it's a area just south of Boston. 2022, there was this guy John O'Keefe who was her boyfriend. He was a Boston police officer. He was found dead in the snow after a night of drinking among himself and Karen Read and some friends. It then sort of turned into this murder mystery among many other things. In terms of the physical evidence at the crime scene, it was something of an unresolvable case. The defense had some theories about who they thought did it. The prosecution obviously blamed Karen Read, but as time went on, some very serious things started to come out about the investigation, about the state police, about the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. And this turned into one of these real-life true crime, dramas where HBO had a documentary, ABC as well, many podcasts. The following of this just became absolutely unbelievable. I mean, these are the kinds of things you see in LA. You don't see this in Norfolk County, Massachusetts, kind of around where I'm from. So the FBI investigated the state investigation. They reportedly disagreed with state prosecutors' theory of the case. And this thing turned into a circus that I think the significance of which goes far beyond the murder case itself.
I think you're right. I think fiasco may be undershooting by a little bit here. So talk to me a little bit about some of the players here in terms of criminal justice in Massachusetts. I know your article mentions that there have been doubts, but how does this kind of play into those doubts and show no, they're well-founded?
Sure. So the investigation in this case was led by the Massachusetts State Police, and the state police for many, many years now it seems like goes from one controversy into the next, whether that's, overtime scandals having to do with, fraudulent overtime, taking bribes in exchange for CDL licenses. Trooper Proctor, who is the lead investigator in this case, his text messages came out at trial where it was shown he was texting all kinds of just unbelievable things about the defendant, very inappropriate, that went to bias and reasonable doubt. If you follow the news around here, it's really like every day. It seems like the Massachusetts State Police is getting in trouble for something. There was also, a big element of the case was all the interrelationships between the parties. People know each other and sort of have these dual relationships, very kind of New England type of thing, to come across. And so the point of me writing the piece that I wrote is I really think the fact that what you have around here is a situation that's not normal. I mean, people get charged with murder every day in the United States, but it is not every day you have a story like this one. I mean, I think nationally people tend to think of New England and of Boston as, the land of the Ivy League and Dunkin' Donuts and Matt Damon and the Red Sox. But what it really is when you live here and you're sort of exposed to what's going on under the surface is there's a significant amount of corruption. There's a significant amount of impropriety that people have sort of just come to expect. And so I think that's a big part of why this case ballooned as big as it did, particularly locally, is that I don't think people were all too surprised that some of the things that were revealed at trial were going on. And in some ways, people kind of expect it now.
So I'm curious if the court of public opinion went one way or the other on this. Is there a sense out there for all those who are not part of the criminal justice system, but nonetheless feel like, well, we think she was guilty, or we think she was, framed or something. I'm curious, how did the public see this when the dust started to settle?
So as the dust was settling, I would say about a couple months ago, I was in a Costco, which was in the same town that the trial was in, and you could see and I saw a number of people walking through wearing these pink hats, women, wearing these hats that said Proctor. It was the name of, as I mentioned, the lead investigator who wrote, pretty misogynistic, kind of offensive things about the defendant. You had hundreds, if not thousands, of people camped out outside the courthouse. Like I mentioned, between the podcasts and the shows and everything else, this thing was, pretty unbelievable. And it's not every case that turns into that. Like I said, most cases are unremarkable. I think the big thing that was going on here, in addition to the fact that, it's a whodunit, I think our culture is interested in, sort of the whole murder mystery, true crime type of thing, is that what you see here, and I'm thinking about a couple months ago, or actually I think it was, earlier this year, I was down in Palm Beach. I was at this event. I was with one of, somebody with the Trump campaign, kind of distant from here. I won't say who, we started talking about this case. Now, this is about as far away as you can get. And they, spent some time living here, just started telling me these like war stories about the state police from back then, how corrupt things are. And it's like, that's not normal. And I think that there's a perception around here that these things are going on, and that there's probably many Karen Reeds. There's probably many people, unfortunately, who have found themselves in investigations that were, pretty dubious and had some things going on that should see the light of day. And I think that's a big part of this case. Culturally in New England, we have a culture where you're not supposed to talk about these things. I mean, the district attorney in this case has been in public office since the 1970s, right? Like, it is a culture where a primary challenge is considered offensive. It's not particularly common. It's machine politics. And so as a result of that, corruption, nepotism, the kinds of things that were on display in a case like this are not only unsurprising, but they're kind of an unfortunate feature of the system of politics that we have here.
Thomas, you make a pretty good case here in the article that even though it's a fiasco, even though it's there's a lot of stuff here that people probably aren't proud of, but the case did blow things open, and it shined light into some dark corners that really needed some light. And it sounds like it actually accomplished some movement, if not accountability, on the part of those in power.
It did. I think one of the big things you have to understand about this case is there was a guy, I think The Atlantic actually profiled him a few months ago. Aidan Kearney goes by the name Turtle Boy. He's an independent reporter who he really, more than anyone else, blew open this case, as you mentioned. Did a lot of intrepid independent reporting, put a lot of information out there that people weren't really otherwise aware of. And without him doing that, it's really unknown whether or not Karen Reed would be in prison right now, let alone the case having the following that it did. The other thing that I think you have to keep in mind is the DA actually put this guy in jail. They said it was, witness intimidation. The witness intimidation law in Massachusetts is pretty old. It's pretty narrow. And so to see journalists or people who are engaging in journalism thrown into the clink is pretty outrageous. But of course, as I said before, the politics that we have in New England, it's very rare that you see, independent voices, people who are going against the grain in a situation where you think, the Boston Globe might, run to their defense. And that wasn't the case. The local media sat on their hands in large part because you're going up against sort of powerful establishment power centers that aren't used to dealing with challenges like this. And so it was very revealing in that regard.
Tom, it's also reassuring to see that, look, I think we're all a little bit jaded. I don't know how anybody could live through the last 5 years and not be just, a little jaded in how politics are done. But it also showed that even a public that's used to, this is how things are done, has limits and will put their foot down, when need be.
You're absolutely right. And I think this was, a very remarkable episode for, if nothing else, because of that. That's something that doesn't really happen in New England very often. So we'll see where things go from here. I think that, criminal justice going forward, people might have a different attitude. It might be more willing to be skeptical of what we're told by authorities and people in suits on TV. And it's interesting to see where that's going to go.
Again, we are talking with Tom Blakely. He is a Young Voices contributor and federal judicial law clerk, served in the Department of Justice. And you also are reachable on social media. Tell us where we can find you and where we can find your work.
Sure. So I post all of my stories on LinkedIn as well as on Twitter. So you can find me there. My handle is just simply my name, very phonetic. You can just type it in and up I come.
All right, Tom, I appreciate you bringing me up to speed on this story. I guarantee I will not scan past a headline with Karen Reed's name in it anymore.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting story, and I'm sure it's not the last we're going to hear about it.